Howdy, I'm Jace, and I am a sex addict. You are watching Sex Life. We talk about sex, and we talk about life, because the two are so interconnected. Each video, I come on and I answer questions about my life as an addict or a person in recovery. Today's question is one that I get more often than any others, and it comes in different forms, but the question is always the same. It'll give a scenario like maybe really high sex drive, or the amount of time spent in fantasy, or the number of partners, or the feelings that happen around sex, or a myriad of different things. And then the question always is, am I a sex addict? That's a super good question, because it's a very confusing area of struggle, because sex addiction is a really broad field that a lot of things fit under. So it is confusing, it's scary, it's weird. To some people it's gross. Some of it is gross. I ain't gonna lie, I've been there. And so a lot of people want to know if their behavior constitutes them being a sex addict. So I am going to read something, an official diagnosis. This year in 2018, the World Health Organization has included in their most recent manual compulsive sexual behavior disorder, which is what we have been referring to as sex addiction. And it's also been hypersexuality, compulsive sexuality. There's been a lot of different names that go around it. I have experience in addictions of several kinds, and I can tell you it's the exact same in my experience and the experience of the people that I've come in contact with. So I think that sex addiction is a fair term. There's a lot of fear around that being a shaming term or stigmatizing. People look at addiction and they think that it's a term used just to get out of bad behavior, like it's a way to excuse bad behavior. There's a lot of stigma around, of course, the addiction itself, but then just the word addiction. And for some reason, there's this idea that you cannot be addicted to sex, even though you can be addicted to other things that people think consume, like drugs or alcohol or food. But then you can also be addicted to the other side of it is called process addiction. And they're not in the same vein as like consuming something, right? They have to do with things that we're doing, our behavior. A lot of things fit under process addictions, and this is one of them. So, are you a sex addict? I am going to read the definition, basically the diagnosis that the World Health Organization has put out, as well as the criteria that most certified sex addiction therapists use to diagnose if someone is dealing with sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior disorder, which is what the World Health Organization has called it. So I don't normally get on here and read things to you, but I'm going to do that today just so that this is the official one. It's not an opinion of mine. It doesn't come from, just people who have experienced it. This is the actual world official diagnosis model for this. So I'm going to read it to you, and then I'll include the link to this article in the summary section of this. So the World Health Organization says this: compulsive sexual behavior disorder is characterized by a persistent pattern of failure to control intense, repetitive sexual impulses or urges, resulting in repetitive sexual behavior. Symptoms may include repetitive sexual activities becoming a central focus of the person's life to the point of neglecting health and personal care or other interests, activities, and responsibilities, numerous unsuccessful efforts to significantly reduce repetitive sexual behavior, and continued repetitive sexual behavior despite adverse consequences or deriving little or no satisfaction from it. The pattern of failure to control intense sexual impulses or urges and resulting repetitive sexual behavior is manifested over an extended period of time, they're saying 6 months or more, and causes marked distress or significant impairment in personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Distress that is entirely related to moral judgments and disapproval about sexual impulses, urges, or behaviors is not sufficient to meet this criteria. Let me read that again. Distress that is entirely related to moral judgments and disapproval about sexual impulses, urges, or behaviors is not sufficient to meet this requirement. Okay, so like if maybe for me, I feel like it's okay to have one partner, but it's not okay to have three partners, and then I have three partners, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a sex addict. Or I've come across people who are attracted to the same sex, and so they think they're a sex addict because that goes against their moral values. Not the same thing. This is the three criteria that certified sex addict therapists use to diagnose this disorder. Preoccupation to the point of obsession with sexual fantasy and or behaviors, loss of control over sexual fantasy and or behaviors, typically evidenced by multiple failed attempts to quit or cut back, and negative consequences directly related to out of control sexual fantasy and behaviors. Okay, that's a mouthful. Go read the article to break that down. But if any of that sounded familiar to you, then yes, the answer to your question is you very well might be struggling with a sex addiction or sexual compulsive behavior disorder. That's a mouthful, but whatever you want to call it, if any of those traits sound similar to you or your situation, then you are in luck because it's a real thing and there's real help for it, right? And there's so many of us, millions. There are millions of people struggling with sex addiction, and there are a ton of resources. There are super fancy, expensive resources. There are completely free resources and everything in between. This is like a new thing in the media, but sex addiction has been around for a really long time. Recovery for sex addiction has been around for decades, and it keeps improving, and it's becoming more and more accessible. And as time goes on, it's becoming less stigmatized as well. So to answer all of the questions that have come in around, am I a sex addict? There you go. I will include that link in the section below. I don't know what it's called. And as well as some resources for finding help if you feel like you fit into that. So that was a lot and a lot of reading, but I hope that was some good information for you. And I just want to leave with the summary that it is diagnosable and it's super treatable. There is definitely recovery. We do not have to live in that suffering, not for one moment longer, and you are certainly not alone. If you recognized any of those traits within yourself, you are not alone. There is a big community of us. We might not all be out in the open, but we are here, and you will absolutely find help. Feel free to contact me through my website below, and I'll do my best to get to your questions or comments as fast as I can. And in the meantime, stay curious.